Hello, you're very welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan, where this week there will be more John McGurk and Sarah Ryan, because last week Kevin Myers was here. He had an awful lot to say. We didn't get to say that much. And I don't say that in a complaining way. It was wonderful to hear from him. And we got a big reaction to that episode. And it was just phenomenal, I think, Sarah, to hear Kevin in such good form. But how are you this week?
Great. I'm good. Yeah, loads of feedback about the podcast last week. But I'm sad today, John, because Jerry Springer died. And can I just say, Jerry Springer was a huge feature of my teenage years, an icon of his time, and introduced trash TV to me and played a huge part in me being a student that my geography teacher had never met when my mum went to the parent-teacher meeting in Leaving Cert year.
You were home watching Jerry Springer while you're in geography class.
And Mary Povich and all those crappy TV things. But no, Jerry Springer just...
Some of us just watched Eurotrash on Friday nights on Channel 5, to be honest.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's dreadful stuff, looking back. Wasn't he a candidate for the United States Senate at one point, Jerry Springer, as a Democrat in Ohio? He was a major, he had strong political views. He was a very liberal, progressive guy away from the studio. And I think there was always the sense that the studio Jerry was very much an act.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Yeah, I think he was a candidate for something at one point, but he just had a great kind of sense of humor about some of the guests. But I was on holiday with my parents when I was about 17, and we were in a restaurant, and my dad in New York, my dad said, "That guy over there looks really like Jerry Springer," and it was Jerry Springer. My brother and I were so amused and met him and everything. We were highly amused to meet him because, it was just ridiculous.
What was he like?
He was just he was really, really nice, really friendly. It was kind of like it was kind of a funny thing. And then I always remember being at home with my brother watching Jerry Springer, and then in the crowd right at the back cheering, to some nonsense about something. There was two guys in Ireland jerseys with a flag, waving a flag. And my brother and I talked about it for years, because this was back in the day when you couldn't rewind it back, or, we just saw this saw this for a second and that was it. And so it's sad. I think he was 78.
Yeah, very young to die by modern standards as well. And he's one of those people. Yeah, I hadn't heard from him or about him for a few years. He kind of fallen off the cultural radar, and then you hear that he's dead, and you're like, God, we're all getting old. But he wasn't the only icon to die this week. I was very affected. Actually felt genuinely sad about the death of Barry Humphries, who for years played Dame Edna Everage and Sir Led Patterson and a whole host of other ridiculous characters, and just had a real knack for puncturing nonsense. I mean, there was this brilliant ability. He was interviewing Jeffrey Archer at one point in the UK, and he said, Jeffrey, do you ever laugh? Do you ever laugh at yourself? And Jeffrey Archer said yes. And he said, well, of course, because if you couldn't laugh at yourself, you'd be missing out on the biggest joke in the history of the world. I mean, that kind of viciousness that delivered with a smile against people who deserved it was a very admirable form of comedy. I always thought.
And doing that kind of, she used to do that kind of mouth thing, mouth thing.
Yeah,
even thinking about it makes me smile.
Yeah, my grandmother used to do that mouth thing actually. She used to get great mannerisms. But anyway,
also one other thing I love about just to finish that her is that a relative of mine who is older. Not that old, but older. I had to spend quite a long time, about less than a year ago, explaining to this person why that's not transgender. And they thought that that's a transgender person, which if you think about it, if you're older and that was your only cultural reference, that's what you would think. But that will always remind me of that now as well. So.
Barry Humphries was actually he was very skeptical of the whole transgender movement. He wrote, and he got in a bit of trouble a few years ago. It's all been forgotten now because he died, and you can't speak well of the dead. But he got in little trouble a few years ago for describing transgender people as people who had mutilated themselves. So he was he had very strong opinions on all of that stuff. But other people, because this isn't a showbiz podcast, but we could talk about it all evening. Other people who've had a difficult week didn't quite die, but Niall Collins has had a bit of a difficult week.
Didn't
Um,
quite die.
well, it remains to be seen because for politicians, having to resign is kind of the equivalent of death. It might even be a fate worse in some if it's because they spent their whole lives getting to be ministers, and then you've got little upstart websites like The Ditch threatening their years of hard work by revealing things like the sale of land 20 odd years ago and what they did and did not vote on it. What was your take on that scandal? Because I wrote about mine during the week. I sensed yours might be a little bit different than mine was.
I mean, I think that this isn't our first rodeo with Niall Collins in the last couple of months, obviously. And I think that some of the other things, there was a different Niall O'Connor or something used on I think it was a planning application, and a couple of other things that to me seemed a lot more serious than this ever did. And I haven't felt at any moment that there was ever any real chance that he was going to resign or anything like that. But I think that being in a meeting where the council is agreeing to put land up for sale that your wife has an interest in buying is a conflict of interest that you should have the cop on to know and to recuse yourself from. And because ultimately you should know that there is a chance that your wife will buy that land. And if your wife buys land, you do have an interest in that. Like if you're married and your partner buys, do you know what I mean? Something you can't there's a very clear line between benefit for you personally and that event. To me, anyway. So I think that there's questions. I don't know if there's still questions. I mean, he made a statement today, fine, but I think he's guilty of very poor judgment. That's concerning.
Cut to the chase. If you were his boss, if you were sitting in the chair of the leader of Fianna Fáil, and they'd be a lot better off if you were, might I add. Would you be saying, Niall, I want a resignation letter, or would you be saying, Niall, you're an absolute idiot, but we're going to have to stand by you on this one, but you owe me one?
I'd be saying, Niall, we're going to stand by you on this. You're an absolute idiot, but because I've made other people in this party resign for far less than this, and I can't afford to lose any more. I mean, that's also part of it. If Dara Calleary going to a fundraiser during COVID was worthy of resignation, and Barry Andrews' nonsense, like drunk driving, or Barry Cowan nonsense drunk driving thing that eventually turned out to be barely anything, was all worthy of people getting the bullet, then this is too. But they don't have them enough of a majority, and it looks bad, and they're going to hang on. That's fine. But I think Dara Calleary got shafted by that nonsense. I think the fact that he was invited to an event and all, I really did not. Okay, maybe should have apologized. Maybe should have got a slap in the wrist for a bit of poor judgment. But the whole COVID thing was mob mentality and chaos and whatever. And I didn't think that was worthy of resignation. I don't think this is either. But I think that the reason why he's not being made resign is because of all those other ones, and Robert Troy as well. So, I'm not sure. I just think that there's a lot of kind of. It might be that it ends up being death by 1,000 cuts. There might be more to come. I don't know. I don't think if I was the leader that I would make him resign, but I think I would definitely be talking to him and saying, I presume that you've learned your lesson here, and that this level of poor judgment won't be something that we're seeing again in the future.
Yeah, there's a few things I agree with you there on. I mean, first of all, I absolutely agree that the stuff that came out about him previously was, to my mind, much more serious. There was evidence, for example, that on a particular planning application, he had said that he did not already own a home when he did. He disputed that, but the documentary evidence was fairly convincing. Then there was the bizarre matter of, as you point out, changing his name on a form. I mean, he's not called Niall O'Connor. He never was, and yet he filled out his name as that on a form, which by itself, I think, is evidence of you wanting to hide something.
Yeah. Keith is Keith Redmond, right? So if Keith was filling out a planning application next week and he wrote down Keith Ryan, you know exactly what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Your pen is hovering over it, and you go, I think I'm going to write it different. Come on.
So yeah, I agree with you on all of that. And I also agree with you that he is benefiting from, ironically, he's benefiting from Micheál Martin's disloyalty to his own people. Because everything you said about Dara Leary and Robert Troy and all the others is true. And objectively, their offences were, and particularly Barry Cowan, their offences were significantly lesser, and they got, the proverbial bullet for it.
Yeah.
So there's a huge issue there. Where I kind of disagree with you is I think this particular story, this particular, I'll take it as a standalone, pretend there's nothing else around it. This particular story. The land in question was sold on the open market by an auctioneer appointed by the council. There were several bidders for it. Mrs. Collins, Mrs. O'Connor, whatever her name is, eventually was the highest bidder, but she ended up paying €30,000 more than she had originally bid. I don't think you can say you have a financial interest in something that you want to buy. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I don't have a financial interest in a car that I'm going to the car garage to think about buying. I'm only thinking about having a financial interest in it. There was no guarantee. Nothing in his vote was decisive. The vote was 7-0. If he voted the other way or abstained, it would have been 6-0. He didn't actually engage in activity that directly enriched himself, and therefore, when people say it's corruption, as some people have said online, I can't agree with that, because to me, corruption is doing something wrong that you knowingly know will enrich yourself. So that to me is an important distinction.
Well, play devil's advocate then. Let's suppose that I'm on the council. I'm in that meeting and I'm aware.
You were on the council, by the way, because you actually have some insight here. You were at one point on the council. Did you ever vote to sell yourself land?
No. I was 24. I didn't own anything or have any money. No, but like there's many ways in which advantage can be achieved in matters of property, matters of life, right? So let's suppose like it is an advantage if you are interested in buying something that the council may or may not put up for sale, and I tell you, we voted this evening. Like I'd have to look more into this and how the information was dispersed. But like, it is an advantage to know that something is coming on the market perhaps before other people. If that was a feature, like, we don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I say to you, listen, I'm just giving you the heads up that the council is about to vote next week on the potential on selling X, Y, and Z, and you say, all right, well, I'm going to get my finances in order, so I'm ready. So when that's announced, I'm early or I'm ready or whatever. That is an advantage over other people. Do you know what I mean? Now, I'm not suggesting that necessarily happened in this case, but I'm saying there's more than one ways to show advantage. And if you know that, you just don't get involved in the meeting, because you know that your wife is interested potentially in buying that. I think it's bad judgment. And I don't think it follows that it's automatic that that there's no advantage being garnered there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a very good point. I don't like it, because I think your point might be better than the one I made. But I have to concede it. I think you made a very good point. There are certain, look, the bottom line is this smells bad. And it smells bad to a lot of people who are very frustrated with how the country is being run. They look at their health services, they look at their education services, they look at immigration and all the other issues that are bothering them. And then they find out that this guy, I mean, ultimately, bear in mind, the other element of this that we haven't mentioned is that I believe Mrs. Collins / O'Connor, originally purchased this to build a health clinic. That was the stated purpose when she expressed interest in buying the land. It was to build a health clinic for the benefit of the community. Purchased the land, and I'm not suggesting, I want to be absolutely clear, I'm not suggesting that she did anything wrong or illegal, but it is on record that's what she said she was buying the land for. The health clinic, for whatever reason, was never built. What was built was 5 houses on the land, which are now going to be sold back to the council, or the council are in talks to buy back. We don't know whether they'll actually buy it back for a very substantial profit. I can see why people will be annoyed by that. That has the. Be very careful on this podcast what we say for legal reasons, but let's just say that to some people it might have the whiff of pulling a fast one.
And I think there's a lot of people in Ireland who feel like that they're being done all the time by the system, by the state, by whatever, you know what I mean? And so, like, again, that comes down to an issue of judgment that, everything probably is all above board. And, like, and I know, John, that like you buy land. Well, and I know, John, you buy land. I wouldn't know. I've never bought land, but like, I can imagine that you buy land with one thing in mind, and maybe that doesn't pan out for a variety of reasons, and that's fine, and things change. But I just think that there's a real like growing cynicism about politics and whatever. And if you're involved in politics, you just have to like be above board, play everything above board, and just be absolutely militant about never being involved in anything that might look like you have a vested interest in this way. And, hopefully this is the end of it. And he's like spoken in the Dáil today. And I saw Sinn Féin coming out and saying he still had questions to answer. But then Louise O'Reilly was asked, well, give one question. And she wasn't really able to come up with a question. So I think he said his piece. What I'd be concerned about is that I think the Ditch are militant about their like research. And I don't know, it just seems that they're just like, drip with all this stuff. And look, let's see what happens. Like, let's see how this plays out. But I don't know. I just think, his judgment should have been better.
Well, speaking of judgment and speaking of the Ditch, I was blown away by Micheál Martin's judgment today. I thought he launched on the floor of the Dáil an attack on the Ditch website, in which he said that they were I don't have the exact quote to hand, but this is a paraphrase, that they were basically a heavily partisan, shady, politically motivated outlet that were transparently out to take down the government, and he didn't have to facilitate them on the floor of the Dáil. I thought that,
except that he just did.
Except that he just did. In the first instance, I thought to myself, because I am the editor of Gript, and had he said that about Gript, I would be popping the champagne corks. I mean, I'd be a little bit annoyed on the one hand, but I'd also be popping the champagne corks because, you're not in journalism to make friends. You're in journalism to make friends and people in power. Then you're no use to anybody. If they're annoyed at you, you're doing something right, and if you're not doing something right, then there are courts of law and defamation suits and lots of lawyers who'll be lining up to put little media outlets out of business. So,
well, I think it speaks like the disdain, and listen, we've seen it with certain times with Gript stuff, that there's a kind of a sneery disdain about, and it speaks more like, even if some of the stuff he's saying about the Ditch is right, and we can talk about that, but there's a kind of a sneery disdain, and it speaks volumes about the kind of relationship he has with all the other journalists, and it's too cozy.
This is
frankly. It shows, and the public are starting to see through it. That's why, as I said on the podcast a number of episodes ago, that it was the first time I ever remember in my living memory that a protest went to a newspaper, the Irish Times, and they were protesting. People are really distrusting of the media now more than ever. And when he stands up and goes on a little rant about the one website that it has, like, it's taken like, is it one or two scalps from his ministers, from his cabinet already, and is now trying to get its third. Is it set? There was Robert Troy. Who else was there?
Damien English.
Oh, it's Fine Gael. But is now looking for its third, scalp from his government. But they're finding facts. They're finding resignation matter amongst his cabinet. They're not like, I remember my dad years ago telling me that he it must have been in the 90s or something, where one of the English tabloids was talking about somebody who was supposed to, some celebrity or some footballer who's supposed to not be drinking, and they got a picture of him in a nightclub, and then they photoshopped drinks on the table in front of him, and they printed that photo. Like, that was the level that they were doing, right? No one's photoshopping anything here. They're uncovering things that become matters for resignation. And so, like, okay, it's annoying or whatever, but like, at the same time, like, it's like, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Yeah. I mean, like, I agree with him that there's a mentality behind this. There's a kind of a vicious, like, absolute agenda here that's not very savoury, but at the same time, A, he's giving them more profile than ever by discussing them, so that's his first mistake. But B, he's exposing, like Micheál, as like he was the Taoiseach, he's now the Taoiseach. Micheál should be kind of peed off with loads of journalists most of the time, and he's not, because no one ever writes anything bad about him.
I mean, I have a piece coming out. It'll actually be out before the podcast, so you might have already read it if you're the kind of person who reads my stuff, and not everyone is. But about this very question, and the fact is, during COVID, the entire media lined up behind him. You take a social issue, a major issue, whether it be abortion, transgenderism, go back as far as gay marriage, the entire media lined up behind him. You take a big question on legislation that might be controversial in another democracy, like the government are debating hate speech legislation this week. Media all lined up behind him. He is not used to having a hostile media. And you mentioned, I mean, that has been our experience at Gript as well, because we produce more content than the Ditch, but it's not we're in different space. They do investigative stuff and they're very good at it. We tend to do more day-to-day coverage of issues. But you go along, Ben Scallon goes along to these press conferences and he asks ministers questions, and sometimes, like some of them are very good, but a lot of times the sneer on their face when they're asked a challenging question is like, who do you think would take a challenging question seriously? Do you not know who we are? Do you not know how things are done? You don't ask those kind of questions of government ministers. That is the attitude. There's an attitude of entitlement in relation to the media. And why wouldn't there be? Media gets loads of money from them. They tend to believe that these people are, I'm not going to say they believe they're bought, but they certainly believe that they should know which side their bread is buttered upon. And I think a lot of journalists, frankly, do. So there's that element too. I mean, the brass neck of complaining about harsh media coverage. I mean, he should swap with Rishi Sunak or Joe Biden for a week. See what they get in terms of harsh media coverage. I mean, both of those people have whole, not just fringe small little outlets, whole mainstream outlets devoted to taking them down. The Guardian in the UK, the Fox News in the US. I mean, hostile media coverage is part of the job, and we all get over it. But that said,
but it's also part of a functioning democracy, John. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not even. It doesn't even show that he's not used to like a harsh media, whatever. It shows how far it's drifted. Do you know what I mean? Like the fact it's not just that the media on a social issue, fine, and the media, everyone lines up. The media line up and they're afraid of their life. They all just talk. They all just say the same thing. No one ever challenges anything. We had a journalist on last week, as we discussed, who used to be one of the people who's talked a bit outside the box on a number of issues. He got cancelled. And they're furious that they can't cancel Gript or The Ditch. That's what it's about. Furious.
There was a column in the Irish Times after Joe Biden was here. I think it was written by Kathy Sheridan. It might have been Miriam Lord. I don't know which of them it was, but it was about it took on the issue head on that the President Biden got sycophantic media coverage when he was here. And the justification was, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, but sure didn't he deserve it? And he's one of us. Of course we gave him sycophantic media coverage. And it's extraordinary. And I mean, there's this sense now that journalism roots for a side, and that side is the people who journalists consider to be respectable. And let's come to The Ditch, because there is no doubt in my mind that The Ditch overtly, in its coverage, the editorial objective is to get rid of this government and get another government in, and the only other available government is one led by Sinn Féin. And it is in that stable. And I think a lot of journalists just don't think that's respectable. Journalists tend to be of the left, but they're not of the Sinn Féin left. They if you did a poll in the Irish Times office who you're going to vote for at the next election, Holly Kearns would do rather better than she'll do with the entire population. Let's put it that way.
But then, John, we're in the age now where we're told that words matter, words can be violence, pronouns are important, this is all important. So I think we should just start calling things what they are. It's not child porn, it's child rape imagery. And it's not journalists, it's activism. You're not a journalist, you're an activist. You're actively working towards an agenda that you believe in. That's not journalism, that's an activist. You're a political activist who writes editorial commentary on the world. So you're not a journalist.
And I'm somebody who does that. I have very strong views, as my readers know, about a whole range of issues. And I write them because I want those issues to get the coverage I think they deserve, and the best arguments for them that I can muster, which might not be the best arguments for them. There's best
Yeah,
arguments I can muster, but I'm honest about it.
Also you're honest about it, but you're closely aligned with your ideology when people talk about you.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that we're supposed to play along. That people in the Irish Times, like Una Mullally, are just objective. They're not. She's an activist. Do you know what I mean? Like this isn't journalism. This is you projecting your opinions and your views, like above all else, with absolutely no objectivity. So you're an activist. So John, Gript would be referred to as a right-wing act. You know what I mean? So if that's the case, well then let's call the Irish Times what it is, which is a left-wing ideological magazine.
Yeah.
Like,
no objections here. No objections here. I'm going to call them that from now on. But the ditch, my point is also activist. It is very clearly activist. It very clearly has an interest in exposing what its journalists believe to be the systematic corruption of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, or FFG, as they call them. Whether that is fair, whether they're only looking, for example, at those two parties. I mean, I haven't seen many investigations into Labour TDs or Green TDs or Sinn Féin TDs. I think they did one story about a Sinn Féin functionary, to be fair to them. But they're looking for stories about this government, and they sort of relish in them.
And I don't think, John, this is my personal opinion, that I don't think that they are correct. I don't think that there is a systemic corruption problem in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I just don't. And if there was, you wouldn't have to find 20-year-old stuff to prove it. Like, I think that there's an agenda there, as you say, and whatever, and nobody no party has a clean slate across the board. Certainly not Sinn Féin. I mean, spare me. Like, do you know what I mean? Is Jonathan Dowdall gone into the witness protection? What's happening there? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's no party that has a clean slate on anything anywhere. There is always going to be bad people. There's always going to be people who, do corrupt things in all areas of life. There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad everything. Fine. So I don't think that there's this inherent culture of corruption in Irish politics. I don't believe that at all. But I think if you dig long enough, you'll find things on everyone.
I agree with you, and I think it's clear. I mean, corruption is a human problem, not a political problem, right? I mean, I often say, without naming any individuals, but it's interesting to me how many people who 20 years ago were long-haired, pajama-wearing green activists, who these days suddenly have green energy companies that are getting significant subsidies from the government. I mean, the temptations of power are everywhere. And they are there regardless of who it is, which is why I think, as a conservative, one should be fundamentally skeptical of giving people power and giving people power over you. But people never seem to put two and two together. They'll say the government is corrupt, and then they'll say, well, we need more government. But
and also, by the way, it's like you and I have discussed this before, but like, I don't think that, it's like conspiracy theorists, like the conspiracy theorists sometimes I see online, and they think that, like, I don't know, all of the government and, the Illuminati and whatever else have all conspired together to spray chemicals and chemtrails into the air to poison us all or whatever. And it's like, I don't think that they're that good that they would be able to keep those kind of secrets. Like, there's just no way that we can't even build a children's hospital. Like, the idea that they would all gather together, keep stum, and have some giant conspiracy theory where they're, injecting people with microchips or whatever, spreading the virus, all the different conspiracy theories, they're just not that good.
This is it.
Sorry.
Can't build a children's hospital, but can organize a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, somebody asked me this week. Somebody on the left who was sort of like having a go at the ditch, actually, rather than said, "Oh, Gript and the ditch are just the same," and we're not. And the difference is, if I could sum it up in a sentence, is that the ditch tends to believe that Ireland has a corruption problem.
Yeah.
Whereas Gript, at least under my editorship, takes the view that Ireland has a competence problem. We have a problem with people who are in power who don't really have any idea what they want to do with it, who tend to hand the decisions over to civil servants, who tend to let their civil servants do all sorts of things that they shouldn't get away with. Like, for example, the bizarre spectacle we had just this week. I know this is slightly off topic, but the bizarre spectacle we had this week of Robert Watt, the Secretary General of the Department of Health, casually telling a Dáil committee that he couldn't tell the minister about a 2 million contract for Tony Holohan because the minister's computer was hacked. And everyone just shrugged their shoulders. Now, you would think in a normal democracy, if there was a revelation that a cabinet minister's computer was hacked, everyone's ears would perk up and go, oh my goodness, has this been reported to the Secret Services, the Gardaí, the Defence Forces? No, they just skimmed right over it. Cabinet minister's computer hacked, so he couldn't be told about the 2 million contract. Oh, spilt milk, but sure, we learn lessons and move on. We have a competence problem. We have a competence problem not only in those who make the decisions, but in those who question the decisions, and that includes journalists. Nobody asks the right questions at the right time, which is why all this nonsense happens. That's my basic theory of the case. The Ditch's basic theory of the case is they're all on the take getting brown envelopes.
Yeah, I don't agree.
I think ours is more persuasive, to be honest. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people are fully subscribed to the idea.
And you'll both be right some of the time. Like you know what I mean? Like, some people will be corrupt and some people will be incompetent. I think I don't believe that there's a culture of corruption, as I said, but I definitely think that we have problems, and I think that the what we accept as a standard for things is low and should be higher. But that's a kind of a, that's a long standing problem that we have. I don't know. I mean, just like there's an interaction between civil service and politicians that's broken, and I don't know how that gets fixed. But what it ends up with is that there's a chasm where accountability jumps into, and we never get any of it. And
before we move on, we're both agreed then that Niall Collins will exercise his brass neck and survive. But I think that's what's going to happen.
But I don't. Yeah, unless there's more or something else happens. But I think that the fact is that, like, Louise O'Reilly, if she can't come up with a question that he has to answer after he's spoken, I think you're flailing in the wind, to be honest.
It goes back to what I said, competence problem. I mean, they don't know what questions to ask. There are questions that could be asked, but anyway, we've spent enough time on this. Let's talk about the Eurovision. I don't know if you were in the country when this week's major scandal broke and there was a major announcement. I just saw that this tweet from this band called Wild Youth, who are this year's crowd who are going to get 0 points in the Eurovision semi-final on behalf of Ireland. This tweet from them that they had, after shocking tweets by their communication, their choreographer had been revealed. They had immediately cut ties, and they were so desperately upset and so sorry to anyone who'd had to see them or been exposed to them. And, it was a disgrace and was immediately dealt with. And what did the guy do? Did you see what he did?
Of course I did.
Yeah, for the listeners very few listeners who probably didn't see it, but he tweeted a picture of this individual in the UK who the BBC described as a woman who had committed a fairly violent rape. And we can't show pictures in this podcast, but picture Steptoe from Steptoe and Son. And you have an idea.
Yeah, that's such a good description.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, he looks like an old fella who lives up a mountain. I mean, some of these people, transgender people who end up in prison for rape and so on. I mean, they might wear lipstick, they might have shaved, they might have gotten breast enhancements or whatever the case may be, and still be recognizably male. This lad basically didn't make any effort at all, bloke. And so their choreographer saw this and said, this is absolute nonsense. This fella is a man. And for that, he got sacked for transphobic tweets. What did you make of it?
I mean, clearly, this is the man in the photo. It's ridiculous. But it's also just the kind of just firing your choreographer and coming out with it because they tweeted that this is the man. I mean, get a grip. Honestly, just get a grip. The whole thing is absurd, and it's just more cowardice. Like, no one would have cared. No one would have noticed. No, lots of people have that view.
Well,
that's a man.
I'm not sure I agree with you. I think to some extent, normal people, that's true. But I think one problem when you're in the arts is that the arts is so dominated by this stuff that actually they probably felt, or maybe even feel, that the majority view was he had to go. Because I did see lots of tweets from people with rainbow flags in their profile and people with Eurovision in their profile. Because the Eurovision and I say this with no derision whatsoever, but it is an event which has certainly over the course of my lifetime become increasingly and now almost exclusively um, associated with the LGBT movement across Europe. It's a very gay event, and I think there was they probably did get a lot of sort of people initially going, "Oh my God, this is so terrible," from across Europe, and that's probably what they reacted to. Um, but I mean, it does show the gulf between that culture and the rest of society. I think because
But it
it's
But it
it's it,
also shows, John, that like, you know, this is the choreographer of the act. It's not the act themselves, it's the choreographer. So, if the lady who works in the canteen and makes the chicken curry's nephew tweeted this, does she get fired too? Do you know what I mean? It's
mhm.
like this is not a public facing person. They're entitled to their view. And the idea of cancelling people down, 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 down the levels is like, I don't know. I'm just really uncomfortable with it. Like, you're a choreographer. You're not a public facing person.
It's
You should be
also
allowed to say what you want.
it's also a little bit it's a little bit ditch like to do a crossover with our last topic, in that this individual, Ian Bannon is his name, he currently has about 1,500 followers on Twitter, but I assume that a good portion of those are people who started following him after this scandal emerged, to see what he'd say.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and the simple fact of the matter is that this guy obviously was tweeting to maybe let's say 60% of those, maybe 900,000 people. Somebody sought him out. Somebody actually said, somebody's looking for dirt here. In other words, somebody's digging through to see, probably going through the Eurovision Act to see if they can create a little mini scandal. Let's not pretend it doesn't happen. It absolutely does happen. Some guy with a couple of thousand followers suddenly discovers a major scandal and is the center of attention for a couple of days, leading a campaign for something to get cancelled. One of the problems with mob culture is how intoxicating it is, how it can give this illusion of power to people who have none of it. So, if you are this little guy with, a few hundred Twitter followers, you can potentially take down Britney Spears if Britney Spears says something bad, and you're the first one to find it. So there's an incentive to lead the mob. And I think
Mm.
that's a factor that really is a big one here. But I mean, then there's just where are the adults? Where are the people who are going to stand up and say, this is bullshit?
Yeah.
Where are they? I mean, J.K. Rowling
They're
said it,
they're they're
but
no, they're afraid. They're afraid of their life of getting cancelled themselves. That's the way this works.
I
Do
actually
you know what I
had
mean?
Ben was scheduled to do an event with Catherine Martin this week, the Minister of Arts, and I had said to him, "You've got to ask her about this. She's the Minister for Arts. This is her responsibility. Put the picture in front of her and say, Minister, is this a man? Do you agree with Ian Bannon or do you agree with the band?" Now, unfortunately, Catherine Martin got sick and couldn't attend. I mean, she had no idea we were going to ask her that question. So I'm not saying she skipped out, genuinely sick and couldn't attend. But there needs to be accountability for this. Like, we need to have some clarity, I think, from the people who lead this country as to what is and is not acceptable to be said. Because if saying that a man is now something that can cost you your job, and likely, I'm sorry to say this because I can't employ Ian Bannon because we don't have jobs for choreographers. There are lots of people who might agree with him who don't have jobs for choreographers. The problem for Ian Bannon is that a lot of the people who have jobs for choreographers work in the arts scene, which is funded by the Arts Council and the government, and he's going to find it very hard to work again. Let's be honest, and I don't think he should, but he's going to find it hard to work again. You can literally destroy people's careers and livelihoods for saying that a man is a man. And that's where we're at.
Yeah,
And I think there
and it
needs to be
used to
political
be,
accountability for that.
yeah, but it used to be the journalist or it used to be the politician, and now we're getting down to the choreographer of the act at the Eurovision. Really? Do you know what I mean?
But
Like, that's the level. And
but
also,
that,
why do you care? Like, ultimately, John, like at the end of the day, the hard reality of it is that if you're transgender people or whatever, the world will never exist where every single person on earth thinks that you are a woman, right? That will never exist. In so far as I'm a woman of 40 years of age nearly, and I'm never going to exist in a world where there won't be some men who think that I should stay at home and never work and look after the children. It's just a fact. There'll always be people who think certain ways. And what is this absolute compulsion with getting rid of these people? Like, why can't you just go, well, I'm happy enough. Like, I'm happy enough that probably, let's say 70-80% of people think that women are equal and whatever and whatever. And I'm not going to go around seeking out the people who don't and like trying to get them cancelled because I don't care.
Mm.
Like this person has now lost their job. Like what? Why did that need to happen? There will always be people who don't think that's a woman. That's just the reality of it. Like, and even if that person was dressed up to the nines, and some transgender women are beautiful, like even if that person was dressed up to the nines and beautiful, there'll still be people who say that's a man. So
but a lot of it
why do you care?
I mean, first of all, you're entirely correct. I've always been a bit of a Rolls Royce, built for comfort, not speed. And I know that there are going to be people in any argument, if somebody lose their temper with me, you're going to resort to calling me fat. Because people can be cruel and they can say things deliberately to be cruel. That's just the world that we live in. But I mean, one of the things, because I've seen in recent years more and more articles popping up in American magazines, because all the world's madness ultimately comes from American magazines. It's the universal law of the universe, where there are transgender people who get very upset that, for example, transgender women, men who have transitioned to becoming women, who get very upset that heterosexual males don't want to date them or don't find them sexually attractive, even though they say,
I've seen this.
Stand in front of the mirror, I'm as attractive as any woman. The simple fact is, you're not a woman. That's why men aren't attracted to you. There's biological reasons for sexual attraction to do with the human drive to reproduce. You can't reproduce. Therefore, sad as it may be, there are going to be some people who are just not attracted to you. And that's the world that we live in. And, and so you see, and this is particularly the case, the lesbian community is really suffering with this at the moment, where there are lots of trans women who also say they're lesbians. And actual lesbian women are saying, well, hold on a second, no, you're not. We're not attracted to you because you're not a woman.
But surely, like I'm old enough to remember when you were absolutely entitled to, decide who, what, when you were attracted to, when you wanted to be with somebody, when you didn't, and all of that. Did that just go out with the wash?
I mean, look, we've had the trans discussion so much on the show that we probably won't go into the weeds on it. But I mean, the point is that, the offense,
people losing their job for having an opinion that a huge amount of people have and are afraid to say is wrong.
The other thing is, this isn't like going up to somebody on the street who you think might be transgender, standing in front of them and going, "You're a man." It is not that level, because that is offensive. I think most people would agree that's offensive, because the person you're attacking or speaking your truth to has done nothing to you, has done nothing wrong, doesn't pose any threat to society that you're aware of, and you're just going up and being a bit of a dick, to use plain speaking language. This, on the other hand,
and a pun, John. Go on.
Don't get the giggles. This, on the other hand, is somebody who is a male person, who is quite obviously a male person, who raped a woman and wants to be accommodated in a woman's prison because he says the law says he's a woman, even though he looks, like I said, like a dirty old man. It is perfectly acceptable. In fact, it is necessary for somebody, whether it be Ian Bannum, J.K. Rowling, or whoever it is, to stand up and go, that is a man. Because it is. And it's relevant, not because we want to offend the person, but because they want to be accommodated in a woman's prison. And the BBC is going along with it and saying this woman was convicted. No, that's not a woman. It's a man. It's relevant. It's not cruelty if you're saying something to prevent an act of harm, which in this case a lot of people would agree is a bloke being locked up with women after having raped other women. I mean, that's not cruelty. That is whistleblowing.
And what about and as we said, like, say nothing for the rights and considerations of the female prison officer who has to do a strip search on that person, as is their constitutional right. So, I don't see the National Women's Council of Ireland or any of them getting out their knickers in a twist about that particular woman, because that's not convenient. But
I thought this was an interesting one in one way, though, speaking of the National Women's Council, in that sometimes you see a small turning of the tide on these issues. And after this happened this week, It ended up being the lead singer of Wild Irish who ended up having to put his social media accounts on private because he was getting such pushback on it. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I thought it was interesting. The usual suspects weren't lining up to say congratulations, well done on defeating transphobia. There was no supportive tweet from the National Women's Council or the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, or even perhaps I didn't check, but I didn't see anything from the Transgender Equality Network. There was a lot of silence. There was no this guy shouldn't have been sacked because they're all quite happy that the bad far right transphobe got sacked. But there was no we're sticking our neck out to defend the band on this one because I think they felt that the winds weren't blowing in the direction that they wanted them to blow in. And I thought that was interesting.
And why do you think that is?
Why do I think that they think the winds are blowing that way?
Why do you think that they didn't come out on this when they come out on anything else, on everything else?
Because I think there's a desire to maintain a little bit of distance from the most extreme consequences of your own beliefs. So there's a desire to pitch themselves almost as a little bit moderate. We're not going to engage in this particular witch hunt. We're not going to speak out against it either, but we're not going to take any. If this goes wrong for Wild Irish, we ain't going to be within a mile of it. Self-preservation, I think, is what the case is there.
I love that that's moderate now.
But that's it.
You just used moderate.
I saw somebody this week in the American presidential election. I can't remember who it was, and I can't remember who they were talking about, but it was somebody who was justifying why they support either Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. And the phrase they used, it was actually a blogger who wrote this, was that too many conservatives want to embrace the arguments that the left were making 5 years ago. So it's the old increment, where 5 years ago we were saying X, and then we lost that argument. So now we're saying we actually support the thing that we opposed 5 years ago, thus far and no further. And I think there's truth to that. And I think this is a kind of issue where you will see some people at once saying, "Oh, this is a bad thing," but if he said he'd opposed gay marriage, now that'd be a different story. There's a sense to which the goalposts keep moving, and even though we recognise this is nonsense now, there's a real risk that in 5 years it'll be something even more ridiculous that people are being cancelled for, and we'll be saying, which even Ian Bannon didn't say that. So I think there's it's quite depressing in a way.
So what you're saying is that there's just so much more fun stuff to come. Is that basically what you're saying?
Oh, who knows? Anyway, speaking of the goalposts moving, because we don't have much time to discuss this, and I know some listeners care deeply about it. You and I, me, for my sins, I know you publicly stated you voted no, but I was the idiot who was the public face of the no campaign in 2018 on the abortion referendum, when we were all told that we were absolute scaremongers, that it was going to be a really restrictive abortion regime, that there was going to be a 3-day waiting period, that there were no abortions after all this sort of stuff. Within 4 years, we now have a review on the table which proposes getting rid of that 3-day waiting period, expanding abortion for all sorts of reasons. It's a good example of the goalposts moving, and it will pass. I know there are some people out there, God love them, who think it won't, but it will, because I think the government have announced that their TDs will have a free vote. And I was doing a count today, and I could find 14 TDs who probably vote against it. I can't see, and which might get 30 votes against on a good day. Is my unfortunate, and hopefully I'm wrong in conclusion. But the goalposts are just moving dramatically. And we had I don't know if you saw this, Sarah, the report which they're going to vote through includes the revelation that there are babies in Ireland who are being born alive after abortions, and no one wants to care for them. As in, nobody wants the hassle. Or maybe that's too cruel. Nobody wants the legal responsibility. No one wants to be on the hook for caring for babies who are born alive as a result of abortion. No, the report doesn't say what actually happens to them, just that they don't get cared for. So presumably they die without any medical or palliative intervention. So there are horrible things happening in Irish hospitals, and we're going to have more horrible things happening in Irish hospitals. And I mean, I just find it hard to. I find it
all
hard
the
to
things we were told would never happen, basically. But the problem with the campaign and everything was that, and I have had in the last week a number of two particular come to mind friends who were, very, very, very big yes voters in that campaign or whatever, who are now kind of saying, well, but this isn't what we voted for, and and I was saying, but like the campaign that was run wasn't truthful, never is, and so now the public have given all future rights to vote on this issue away, and so this was always going the way it was going to go, and I mean it is what it is, John. You know what I mean? Like we talked before, like the culture changes, things become more progressive, things become normalized, and this is the slope, and that's just the way it goes. Like I don't like it, but this is what was going to happen.
Well, I mean, it's a good
and we
example
were
of that.
told during the campaign that was a lie, and it was scaremongering, and it wasn't true, and it was just about difficult cases, and it was limited, and it was restricted, and it was blah 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 blah. Well,
10 years ago, Simon Harris had just been re-elected to the Dáil, or maybe it was elected for the first time to the Dáil, having signed a pledge to the pro-life campaign, I think it was, that he would vote against the introduction of abortion. And I say that not to highlight the fact that he broke his promise, though he did, but I am saying it to highlight how much the political winds can shift in such a period that we now have a massive further expansion of abortion after two expansions of abortion over the last 10 years, a massive other one, and it has become one of those things where there is, much like all the other topics I mentioned, the media are lined up entirely behind the government and the review on this one, and I mean there's a massive full court press to make sure the thing passes, and not much resistance to it. In all honesty, I say that with no disrespect to the pro-life organizations who are doing all that they can to highlight the issues, but I mean not much resistance amongst the public to it. There's a sort of resignation that this is just the way things are now. So it's
and also politicians, like as you say, Simon Harrison by no means was he the only one that, like, if you're you'll be accommodated by the media in doing a complete reversal of your views on an issue, provided the reversal is going in the right direction.
Well, I always say what's the simplest definition of far right in this country? It is, to my eyes,
pro-life.
No. The simplest definition of being far right in this country is somebody who publicly believes everything that Leo Varadkar publicly believed in 2012. That's it.
Ooh, that's very. Was he pro-life in 2012?
He, I couldn't place it, but he was certainly in favor of restrictions on immigration, both on law and order, wanted to cut taxes, opposed gay marriage. I mean, he only came out for gay marriage. The referendum was in 2015. I think it was the year before that he came out that he changed his mind on that.
You're right.
He was, I believe, pro-life.
I think the definition of far right in Ireland is, I think, in mind, the definition of far right. And again, far right, it's like, it's a nonsense phrase. It doesn't mean more, and it's been taken over as a slur, and it's kind of it's something you should be afraid. If you have a question about immigration, concerned about abortion, you're probably far right.
Yeah, we slightly lost your audio for a second there, Sarah, but I think we got the gist. You're correct. The other definition is anyone who disagrees with Paul Murphy on anything. That is the other definition of far right, as we learned this week. But anyway, I think we'll leave it there. I think we've gone almost an hour, and it's been a pleasure, well, a depressing pleasure, as ever, to go through the events of the week with you. Thank you as ever to our listeners. I hope you got some new perspectives or some ideas that you mightn't have heard elsewhere this week, or think about some of these issues. We are always honored when you listen to us, and we are even more honored when you make the time to tell us what you think. So if you think I got something wrong or Sarah got something wrong, do let us know. And if there's something you want us to talk about that you don't think is being covered elsewhere, drop us a line about that as well. But for now, from Sarah and from me, until next week, that was the week that really was.